the daughter and sister of refugees. Over 61 years ago, my father, at the age of 34, made the difficult decision to escape. The decision was difficult not only because he would be risking his life, but also the lives of his 3 daughters, ages 3, 7, and 8 at the time. He decided that it was better to risk their lives in pursuit of freedom than to commit their futures to living under communist rule. They escaped, crossing the border into Austria, and arrived to a refugee camp. Less than 2 months into their stay in the refugee camp, President Eisenhower sent his personal plane, Air Force One, to bring 21 Hungarian refugees to the US on Christmas Day, 1956. My father and 3 eldest sisters were part of the 21 Hungarian refugees on Air Force One. As a parent, I can't imagine what that must have felt like, going from running for your life to watching your daughters climb the stairs of Air Force One to freedom. I picture my sisters eating their Christmas dinner on the plane, entirely unaware that one simple act of generosity from the most powerful man in the world changed their futures forever. And when I think about this moment in my family's history, I wonder what we can all do to secure the future for our children. You see, I stand in front of you tonight because someone in a position of power said, "Not on my watch." And that is why I founded my company, Pipeline, to say "not on my watch," to be sure that the men and women, boys and girls coming after me had more opportunity than what I had. In 2017, my family had the option to move to Chicago or Zurich for job opportunities. We were faced with a decision. Do we continue along the traditional path with my corporate career, or do we take the gifts that were given to us and use them for the greater good? We decided that we had the unique privilege and opportunity to rewrite the future, and so we chose to create Pipeline. Pipeline is a software platform that increases financial performance of companies through closing the gender equity gap. In the time since the news of Harvey Weinstein broke, over 50 men across entertainment, media, and politics have been accused of sexual misconduct, most with multiple survivors. Before Weinstein, we had Bill Cosby, Jerry Sandusky, Bill O'Reilly, and Roger Ailes. These are not stories of people who got caught. These are stories of people who got away with it. In the US, we subject almost 40% of workers to binding arbitration agreements. These agreements strip away employees' Seventh Amendment rights and obstruct labor laws that were designed to protect them. We are, in effect, asking 60 million employees in the US to choose between their personal safety and their economic security. This problem is not limited to the US. In no country on earth are women equal. Not one, not by any measure. World Economic Forum, United Nations, OECD. And in the last year, we have added 47 years to the time to global gender equality and 10 years in North America. Did you know that in New Zealand, with a female head of state, women make up only 34% members of parliament? And in Russia, they are slated to have 5 million fewer workers in 2025 than in 2014 because of their lack of gender equity. And in East Asia and the Pacific, they leave up to $30 billion on the table each and every year because of gender gaps in education. We are not moving forward. We are moving backward. And this is not a trend we can afford, not when we face a 5 million worker shortage in the US and 40 million globally. And women are the primary or sole breadwinners in 40% of households in the US with children under the age of 18. Being surprised or angry is not enough. We need to channel our emotions into action. Positive action for men and women, boys and girls. This means designing the world that we want to live in and asking, what are we for? What if we designed a new future? What would that look like? My first day as full-time CEO of Pipeline was April 4th, 2017. That's Equal Pay Day in the US. It is the aggregate day when we recognize when women make the same as their male counterparts did on December 31st of the year before. Women work on average for free almost 3 months each and every year. This is why we can use gender as a marker for poverty during working age and beyond. Is this really the world that we're willing to accept? One in which we leave out almost half of our labor base? When I was a little girl, I was told that if I worked hard and did well in school, I could be anything I wanted to be. So I worked hard in school, obtaining a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees, even interning in Washington, D.C. during college. Then I set off in the corporate world and took advantage of every opportunity. Eventually, I became the sole breadwinner for my family. When I was on maternity leave with my daughter, my boss was optimized. That's a fancy word for fired. A day after I got back from maternity leave, I was asked to take on an additional team. 2 weeks later, I was asked to take on yet another team. That meant I had 3 teams I was managing. My male colleague, who was 1 pay grade higher than I was asked to take on 1 additional team. He also received additional pay for that new team. I received nothing. So I called HR and my new manager and I said, "How do you want to make me whole?" They said nothing. So I did my research. And I found the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which changed the statute of limitations for equal pay. I called HR and I said, "This is a Lilly Ledbetter issue. Every time you pay me, the statute of limitations starts over. What do you want to do about it?" To their credit, they increased my pay grade, increased my pay, and gave me back pay. Certainly, it's a story of success. But why did I have to research my rights in order to be treated fairly? Is this really the world that we're willing to settle for? What I learned from fighting to be paid equitably is that working hard does not equal success. When we tell little girls that if they work hard and do well in school, they can be anything they want to be, we are misleading them. We live in a world where more men named John run companies than women of any name. And men named John make up 1.2% of the population. Women make up 51%. We live in a world where we undervalue our female talent in the workplace and undervalue our male talent in the home. This leads to a world where women make up only 20% of senior leaders, and the 48% of working fathers who would like to stay home can't. I've always believed that we must do our research, we must learn the system, and then change it. Enter Pipeline. How might we use advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence and cloud computing to make the world more equitable? Well, we did just that, proving that for every 10% increase in gender equity, there is a 1 to 2% increase in revenue, and operationalizing that model through our system. The goal of Pipeline is to bend the arc of history toward inclusion. You see, gender equity is not just a social issue. It is a massive economic opportunity. In the US, we could actually increase our GDP by $2 trillion if we close the gender equity gap. When I fought to be paid equitably, and my children are actually here tonight, when I fought to be paid equitably, I could never figure out why my children were worth less to society simply because their mother was the sole breadwinner. But what if we lived in a world where that was no longer a question? Where women ran 46% of companies and maybe even 51%. Where women were 51% of partners in venture capital firms and 51% of members of Congress. Where men ran 51% of our homes and were 51% of stay-at-home parents. What could happen then? Could we cut the rate of suicide, domestic violence, sexual harassment and assault, increase our GDP by $2 trillion? In 2008, my husband made the difficult decision and decided to chart a new path and become a stay-at-home father for the good of our family. It was a difficult decision. Being a stay-at-home father is a particularly lonely endeavor, especially 10 years ago. He was often the only father in the room, the only man in the room, among a group of stay-at-home moms and female nannies. There weren't folks to talk to about the loneliness of charting a new path or the struggle of putting your career on hold for your family, but he did it because it was the right thing to do. Years of corporate efforts to increase gender diversity have been focused on fixing women, closing their perceived gaps and being effective, whether it's negotiation, applying for jobs, or ending the uptick in their speech. Women are not broken. The system is broken. We must fix the system. And our broken system is coming at a tremendous economic cost, $2 trillion in the US and $12 trillion globally. You see, we can choose how we want to pay for people. We cannot choose whether or not we pay. And here are some examples of how we pay. Among people 65 and older, women are over twice as likely to live in poverty than men. We could close the Social Security savings gap by a third if we closed the gender pay gap. And over 56% of children who live in poverty are living in households headed by women. We are paying for people regardless. The question is, how do we want to pay? Whether or not you believe that gender equity is an issue, it is a massive economic opportunity. It's time that we no longer leave out 40% of households in the US with children under the age of 18, 46% of our labor base, and 51% of our population. We are facing a global human capital crisis, one in which we will not be able to fill up to 40 million jobs in less than 2 years. So the question for each of us is, are we willing to stand up? Are we willing to say, not on my watch? Are we willing to build a brighter future for ourselves and for the generations that come after us? What is the world that you are designing? My personal mission is to end the gender equity gap once and for all. I started Pipeline so that when we tell little girls that they can be anything they want to be, we are telling them the truth. And when men choose to stay home, we are not exiling them to a life of social isolation, a world where children are valued equally, regardless of whether or not their mom or dad is the sole breadwinner. 61 years ago, one powerful man took a stand and said, not on my watch. It altered the course for my family and rewrote the story of my future. We can close the gender equity gap, but only if we work together. Tonight, I am asking each of you in this room to join me, to stand up, to say not on my watch, to ensure that every man and woman, boy and girl has the opportunity to step into a life the size of their dreams.